Welcome to Pillowtime Lore, a quiet little haven where the world slows down and stories come to life just as the night settles in. Maybe you remember being a child, curled up under a soft blanket while your mom or dad sat beside you, their voice gentle and soothing. The day's troubles didn't matter then. The only thing that existed was the safety of their words, the warmth of their touch, and the promise that everything would be all right by morning. Perhaps you can still recall the way they'd caress your hair or hum a lullaby as your eyelids grew heavy. Those moments stay with us, tucked deep inside our hearts. Even as we grow older, here at Pillowtime Lore, we try to bring that same feeling back, that comforting sense of being cared for, of letting go, of slipping into dreams without a worry in the world. For some of you, today might have been long and exhausting. Maybe it didn't go as planned, or maybe the world just felt a little too loud. That's okay. This is your time now. Think of me as a cozy old grandma, sitting in a rocking chair by the fire, speaking softly as you settle in and let the day melt away. Each story we share is like a soft, warm blanket for the soul, filled with wonder, magic, and peace. So snuggle in, close your eyes, and let the words carry you to a place where worries can't follow. Welcome to Pillowtime Lore, where every night ends with comfort, and every story feels like home. Far, far away, beyond quiet villages and winding rivers, there lies a city that never truly sleeps. A place where glowing lanterns sway in the night breeze and secrets hide in every corner. In the heart of this city stands a grand old boarding school, its walls tall and proud, its windows creaking like they've been whispering stories for centuries. By day, the halls are filled with laughter, chatter, and hurried footsteps. But by night, by night, the shadows grow longer, and the air hums with mysteries untold. Many who pass by this school think it ordinary, but if you pause and listen closely, you might hear things most people never notice. The rustle of dreams, the soft sigh of longing, and maybe, just maybe, the flicker of magic dancing in the dark. This is where our story begins, with a young girl named Elara, who arrives at this school with a heart full of hope and a mind filled with stories. She carries with her a book of fairy tales and the promise of her beloved father, who swore he'd return for her soon. What Elara doesn't know is that life is about to weave her into a tale far grander than any she's ever read. A tale of courage, kindness, and the unseen threads that bind us all together. But be warned, dear listener, for not every smile is kind, and not every shadow is empty. There are those who hide their hearts behind velvet curtains, and those who walk with secrets too heavy to name. Within these walls, joy and sorrow dance side by side, and sometimes the darkest nights give birth to the brightest dawns. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Listen closely, for this is no ordinary tale. It is a story of hope and heartbreak, of loss and wonder, and of a girl who would discover that even in the coldest of attics, a spark of magic can still glow, warm and bright. The night before her departure, Elara sat by the small wooden window of her room, the moonlight spilling across the floor like silver paint. Her father, sat beside her, his warm hand resting on hers. And he told her softly that every journey begins with a trembling heart. But those who dare to take the first step often find the greatest treasures. His words wrapped around her like a blanket, comforting yet bittersweet. For she knew that in the morning she would leave behind everything familiar. The old house with its creaky floors, the tiny garden where wildflowers grew without rules, and the village where everyone knew her name. As dawn crept in, she packed her few belongings carefully, among them her favorite book of fairy tales, its pages worn and edges frayed from countless readings. To Elara, this book was more than just stories. It was a friend, a shield against fear, and a reminder that even in the darkest chapters, there is always a chance for magic. Her father hugged her tightly before they boarded the carriage, whispering promises of his swift return. He was a merchant known for his honesty and kind heart, a man who believed that wealth was meant to be shared, not hoarded, and his laughter was the kind that could make even the most troubled soul smile. The city greeted them with noise and color, the clatter of hooves on cobblestone streets, and the smell of fresh bread mingled with smoke from the chimneys. Elara's eyes widened in wonder, for she had never seen buildings so tall or lanterns that glowed even in the day. The boarding school stood at the end of a long lane, its towering gates and ivy-covered walls both inviting and intimidating. Ms. Hawthorne, the headmistress, appeared at the entrance with a sharp smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her voice was sweet like syrup, but held a trace of something Elara couldn't name. As Elara stepped into the grand hall, her elegant clothes and unusual accent drew attention. Groups of girls whispered behind their hands, giggling softly, some out of admiration, others out of envy, but Elara, innocent and eager, smiled warmly and greeted them, believing kindness could bridge any distance. She thought of her father's parting words, that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it, and with that thought in her heart, she promised herself that this would not just be a school, it would be the beginning of a story worth telling. The first few days at the school felt like walking into a dream for Elara. Though she missed her father dearly, she poured her heart into making this strange new place feel like home. She greeted everyone with kindness, offering to help wherever she could, carrying books for younger girls or sharing her lunch with anyone who had none. Her gentle ways and soft laughter made her stand out. It was said that when Elara smiled, the room seemed a little brighter, and soon even the stern teachers began to soften around her kindness. After all, has a way of weaving invisible threads that tie hearts together. At night, when the lamps were dimmed and the corridors quieted, the girls would gather around Elara's bed in hushed excitement. Elara would sit cross-legged, her fairy tale book resting in her lap, though she rarely read from it. Instead, she spun stories of her own. Stories of kingdoms hidden beneath the sea, of warriors who carried swords made of starlight, of queens who ruled not through fear but through love. Her voice was soft but carried a magic that seemed to paint pictures in the air. The girls listened wide-eyed, holding their breath as if a single word might shatter the spell. They began calling her the princess, not out of mockery, but because her tales were so vivid and her manner so graceful that it felt like she truly belonged to another world. Elara laughed at the name at first, yet deep inside she carried herself with a quiet dignity, not because she thought herself better, but because she believed every soul deserved to feel like royalty in their own story. And oh, how the girls adored her for it. Ms. Hawthorne soon noticed this admiration, and while her smile remained as sharp as ever, she began to treat Elara differently, seating her at the front of the dining hall, praising her work in classes, and showering her with special privileges. Each week, letters arrived from Elara's father, often accompanied by small gifts like a silk ribbon or a painted charm, tokens that spoke of love across the distance. These gifts only deepened the other girls' fascination with Elara, but admiration can be a fragile thing, for where there is light, there are always shadows. Not every girl was enchanted by Elara's stories. Jealousy began to curl like smoke in the hearts of a few. They smiled when she looked their way, but when her back was turned, their whispers grew sharper, like thorns waiting beneath soft petals, plotting quietly for the day they might see her stumble. The morning came with rain that seemed to fall endlessly from a sky heavy with sorrow. Droplets raced down the tall windows of the grand hall, their quiet tapping like a whisper of secrets too dark to speak aloud. The girls huddled together near the fire, sipping their warm tea and giggling softly, while Elara sat by herself near the edge of the room, gazing out at the gray world beyond. She always loved rainy days, saying they made stories feel more alive, as if the sky itself was turning a page. Little did she know that this day would bring a chapter she never wished to read. At the gate, a rider arrived, soaked to the bone, carrying a single envelope, its wax seal broken slightly by the storm. Ms. Hawthorne took the letter with a tight grip. Her lips pressed thin, she retreated to her office, closing the door firmly behind her. No one saw what was written inside, but they did see the change that came over her face. The corners of her mouth curled in a way that sent a chill through the air, like the first crack of ice before a river breaks free. Later, as the rain continued its mournful song, Ms. Hawthorne summoned Elara, her voice smooth and sweet, yet beneath it lay something sharp. Elara entered nervously, her heart thudding. Ms. Hawthorne began slowly, circling around her like a hawk, before finally delivering the words that would shatter Elara's world. "Your father's ship has been lost at sea," she said, her tone heavy, but her eyes glinting strangely. There were no survivors, and with it went his entire fortune. Elara felt the room spin, her legs trembling as if the ground itself was crumbling away. Her father, the man whose laughter could warm the coldest winter, whose hands had guided hers when she learned to write, whose stories had taught her courage, gone. The very air seemed to vanish from her lungs, and then came the final blow. Ms. Hawthorne's voice turned colder than the rain outside. She told Elara that her school fees were unpaid, and as there was no money left, Elara must now work to repay what was owed. From this day forward, she would no longer be a student, but a servant. It was in that moment that Elara understood how quickly the world can change. How the same walls that sheltered you yesterday can become your prison today. Her hands clutched at her skirt, her heart breaking as she realized she was completely, utterly alone. The sun rose cold and pale the next morning, but for Elara, it felt as though it had not risen at all, as though the world had been cloaked in shadow overnight. Before she had even finished her morning tea, two stern women entered her room. Without a word, they began gathering her dresses, her ribbons, her tiny treasures carefully collected over the years. One by one, all snatched away as if they had never belonged to her. Elara wanted to protest, to scream, but the lump in her throat held her voice prisoner. Her fingers clutched the edge of her blanket, knowing deep inside that nothing she said would change what was to come. Miss Hawthorne appeared at the doorway, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a hawk circling its prey. She spoke in a tone that was cold and polished, telling Elara that these luxuries were no longer hers, that from this moment forward she must earn her keep. It was strange, Elara thought, how a person's voice could cut deeper than any blade. She was led down a narrow hallway, past the rooms where the other girls still slept in warm beds, past the laughter and soft glow of lamps, until they reached the very top of the house. The attic was small and dark, its walls cracked like old parchment. The single window rattled in the wind, and a thin blanket lay folded on a cot so narrow it seemed meant for a child. Elara stepped inside and felt the chill wrap around her like icy fingers. She told herself to be strong, but when the door shut behind her, a tear slipped free. Landing silently on the wooden floor, her former friends were quick to turn cruel, whispering behind her back during chores. Some bold enough to sneer at her face, calling her names meant to sting. They had once clapped eagerly at her stories. Now they treated her like a shadow. Mira, the quiet maid, was the only one who showed her kindness, slipping her extra bread when she could, offering a soft smile when no one else dared. At night, when the house was silent, Elara would tell Mira the same kind of stories she once told the girls in their warm chambers. Only now she told them softly, weaving magic through the cold darkness. She imagined the cracked attic walls were strong castle towers, that the wind at the window was a loyal guard keeping watch, and as Mira listened with shining eyes, Elara whispered to herself that though her world had crumbled, her spirit would not. For a story can be the last light when all other lights have gone. The days began to blend together like the gray sky outside the attic window. Morning after morning, Elara woke to the sound of the bell, her body aching from the cold floor and the endless work that awaited her. Her hands were always raw from scrubbing floors and carrying heavy buckets of water, and her once soft hair now fell in tangled waves around her tired face. Yet, when she looked into the cracked piece of mirror that hung on the wall, she whispered to herself that she was still Elara, still her father's brave daughter, and she would not let them steal the spark in her heart. Each task became a trial, a test of her strength and will. When she swept the long corridors, she imagined she was clearing a secret path through an enchanted forest. When she polished the great silverware, she pretended each piece was a treasure reclaimed from pirates. And when she scrubbed the cold stone floors late at night, she thought of herself as a warrior preparing for battle. It was these little games of imagination that kept her spirit from breaking. For Elara had learned a truth that many never see. The body may grow tired, but the mind can still dance freely in dreams. The other girls whispered cruel words when she passed, their laughter like needles pricking her skin. Sometimes they spoke just loud enough for her to hear, telling lies about her father, mocking the way she now wore patched clothes. Elara kept her head high, silent and steady. for she knew their cruelty came from fear. Fear that one day they too might fall from grace. Mira became her anchor in those dark weeks, the quiet maid with gentle hands and kind eyes. At night, they shared scraps of food beneath the thin blanket. Mira spoke of her childhood in the countryside, while Elara whispered stories of castles and dragons. Weaving magic into the frozen air, they would laugh softly, even when their stomachs growled with hunger. For laughter, like a candle, can chase away even the deepest shadows. And deep inside, Elara carried a secret hope, a belief that her suffering was not the end of her story. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she felt as if something unseen was watching over her, like a guardian waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Perhaps it was foolishness, perhaps only a dream, but Elara clung to it tightly, for sometimes the smallest flicker of belief can light the darkest night. Winter's breath crept through the cracks of the attic walls, wrapping Elara in its icy fingers as she sat by the small window. The nights were the hardest, when the world below slept and silence pressed down like a heavy blanket. It was during one such night, while hugging her knees to keep warm, that she noticed a faint glow in the house next door. At first, she thought it was just the reflection of the moonlight, but then it flickered, steady and warm, like the flame of a guarded secret. Elara pressed her face closer to the cold glass. Through the drifting mist, she saw a shadowy figure sitting beside the lamp. His back bent slightly, his movements slow and deliberate. Sometimes he seemed to be writing, other times simply staring into the light as though it held the answers to questions only he knew. Night after night, the glow appeared, and soon, faint music began to drift across the narrow gap between the two houses, soft and haunting, the kind of melody that seemed to carry memories from long ago. The music comforted Elara in ways she couldn't explain. When the cold made her bones ache and the darkness felt unbearable, that gentle tune wrapped around her like an invisible quilt. She began to make up stories about the mysterious man, imagining him as a wizard who lived in solitude, guarding powerful secrets, or a wise king who had given up his throne to protect a hidden treasure. It was easier to believe in magic than to face the cruelty of her reality. One evening, as Mira handed Elara a piece of bread, Elara asked about the man next door. Myra's brow furrowed as she whispered that no one knew much about him. He rarely left his home and rarely spoke to anyone. Some said he had suffered great losses in his life. Others claimed he was simply a recluse who preferred shadows to company. Elara's heart stirred with a strange hope. She began to think of him not just as a neighbor, but as a silent guardian, someone who, perhaps, without knowing it, was keeping watch over her. And though she had never spoken a word to him, she felt a thread connecting their lonely hearts in the stillness of those cold nights. She would close her eyes and whisper thanks to the window glow, believing that somewhere out there, kindness was still alive, even if it lived quietly in the dark. The storm came without warning, sweeping through the night with howling winds and rain that lashed against the windows like an angry sea. Elara and Myra trudged up the creaking staircase after a day of endless chores, their clothes damp, their stomachs empty, and their spirits weary. the attic was colder than ever, and both girls longed only to curl up under their thin blanket and forget the world for a while. Yet, when Elara pushed open the door, she froze, her breath catching in her throat. The room was no longer the dark, lonely space they had left behind. It glowed softly with the light of dozens of candles, their flames dancing like tiny stars. Warm blankets lay neatly folded at the foot of the cot. The floor was swept clean, and in the center stood a small table laden with food so rich and fragrant that Elara's eyes filled with tears. Golden bread, steaming soup, and sweet pastries dusted with sugar. It was like stepping into one of her own stories, Mira gasped, covering her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Elara reached out trembling, afraid that if she touched anything, it might vanish like a dream. She whispered that perhaps her stories had come to life, that maybe, just maybe, the magic she always spoke of had heard her and decided to answer. Mira, ever practical, shook her head and said that someone must be behind this, a kind soul who wished to help them in secret. That night, they ate slowly, savoring every bite, the warmth of the food filling their bellies and the warmth of hope filling their hearts. When they lay down beneath the soft blankets, Elara whispered that sometimes the world waits for the moment when you are at your lowest to show you a glimpse of wonder. And Mira, though doubtful, could not help but agree as she drifted into the most peaceful sleep she'd had in months. The next evening, after another grueling day, they returned to find new surprises, a pair of soft slippers for each of them, a small book filled with beautiful sketches, and a jug of warm milk that steamed in the candlelight. Elara clasped her hands in delight, convinced more than ever that some unseen magic was at work. Mira still suspected a secret helper, but neither girl spoke of it to anyone. They decided to keep this miracle to themselves, guarding it like a precious jewel. For sometimes the most fragile wonders are those that thrive in silence. Whispers are like smoke, my dear. They slip through cracks and curl into corners where even the sharpest eyes cannot see. And before long, they spread until the whole house breathes them in. This is exactly what happened when the other girls began noticing. Elara's cheeks looking rosier and her steps seeming lighter. They began to murmur among themselves that perhaps she was hiding some secret treasure, some good fortune that had fallen into her lap, while the rest of them suffered in the cold and the dark. Jealousy, you see, has a way of making bitter hearts beat louder. Among these whisperers was Lydia, a sharp-tongued girl with eyes like a hawk and a heart as cold as the frost on the windows. Lydia never liked Elara, perhaps because Elara had a quiet grace about her that no amount of cruelty could strip away. One evening, Lydia crept up the attic stairs, careful as a shadow, and hid herself behind an old trunk to spy on Elara and Mira. She waited, her breath shallow, until she saw the flickering candlelight and the sight of the warm food and gifts that had appeared as if by magic. Her lips curled into a smile that was anything but kind. The very next morning, Lydia scurried to Ms. Hawthorne's office like a rat carrying scraps, her voice trembling with fake concern as she told the headmistress everything she had seen. Ms. Hawthorne's face grew redder with each word. Her pride stung at the thought of someone defying her authority. She refused to believe in mysterious magic or secret kindness. To her mind, Elara was simply a thief. stealing from the school's supplies and daring to act innocent. Ms. Hawthorne's mind whirred like a trap being set. She vowed to catch Elara red-handed and humiliate her before the entire school, to make her an example of what happens when a girl forgets her place. And so she began to watch and wait, her sharp eyes hidden behind a mask of icy politeness. Meanwhile, Elara, unaware of the storm brewing around her, spent her nights speaking softly to Mira about her dreams. She told her that she could not, would not, believe her father was truly gone. She imagined him somewhere out there, searching for her as desperately as she longed for him. In her heart, she held to the belief that hope, like a candle, must never be allowed to go out. But sometimes, my dear, when light shines brightest, it casts the darkest shadows, and soon those shadows would come creeping right to Elara's door. The night was thick with silence, the kind that makes your heart beat louder in your ears. Elara and Mira were huddled together in the attic, whispering softly of dreams and distant hopes, when suddenly the door burst open with a crash like thunder. There stood Ms. Hawthorne, her eyes blazing and her mouth twisted into a cruel smile. She had come to end it all, to drag Elara down into the dirt before every soul in the house, accusing her of being a thief and a liar. The room seemed to shiver with her anger. But before Ms. Hawthorne could speak her venom, another sound rose beneath the storm, the steady rhythm of heavy boots on wooden stairs. Then, from the darkness of the corridor, appeared a group of men carrying lanterns that bathed the hall in golden light. At their center stood the old man from the house next door, his back straight despite his years, his face weathered but strong. He raised his hand, and in that moment, even Ms. Hawthorne faltered, for there was a power in his gaze that could not be denied. He stepped forward, and his voice filled the room like a warm fire chasing away the cold. He revealed that he had been Elara's father's closest friend and business partner, a man bound by loyalty and love for the family Elara had thought lost to her when her father's ship had vanished. He had searched tirelessly for Elara, finally discovering where she was, but fearing Ms. Hawthorne's greed and cruelty, he had chosen to help her in secret, slipping food, blankets, and gifts through a hidden passageway that connected his house to the attic. Ms. Hawthorne's face drained of color as the truth unraveled before the crowd of students who had gathered at the doorway. Her lies stood naked under the lantern light, no longer wrapped in the silk of authority. She stammered and tried to defend herself, but the old man silenced her with a single look, turning to Elara. He told her that her father's debts had been cleared, and though her father's ship had been lost, there was no proof of his death, which meant there was still hope that he might yet return. Tears filled Elara's eyes, but they were tears of relief and wonder. Myra clutched her hand tightly, and the girls knew that the magic they had felt was not from fairy tales, but from the kindness and courage of those who love us, even when we cannot see them. And so the night ended, not with despair, but with the promise of a brighter dawn. The house seemed different the very next morning, as though a great shadow had lifted from its walls. The hallways were filled with the soft glow of sunlight, and the coldness that had once clung to every corner was gone. Elara was given a beautiful new room with warm rugs, polished furniture, and a bed so soft it felt like a cloud beneath her tired body. Yet, even as she looked around at the splendor, her heart remained gentle and humble. For she knew too well what it was like to have nothing, and she vowed that no amount of comfort would ever make her forget the nights spent shivering in the lonely attic. Her very first act was to take Mira's hand and thank her with tears in her eyes. She told Mira that without her kindness and friendship, she might have lost herself entirely. Myra's cheeks flushed, and she tried to brush off the praise, but Elara held her tightly and whispered that true treasures are never made of gold or jewels, but of the people who stand by you when the world turns cold. Mira promised that they would always be sisters of the heart, and Elara vowed that her days of telling stories would never end. The old man, whose name was revealed to be Master Alaric, promised Elara that he would never stop searching for her father, his voice steady and filled with determination. He told her that the bond between true friends is as strong as blood, and that no storm, number ocean, and no shadow of misfortune could sever it. Elara felt a spark of hope rise in her chest, a belief that one day she would see her father again, standing at the door with open arms. As for Ms. Hawthorne, she was forced to face her shame before the very students she had ruled with fear. Her voice trembled, but Elara, with a grace that silenced the room, forgave her, for she understood that anger was another kind of chain, and only forgiveness could break it. Ms. Hawthorne lowered her head, humbled and forever changed by the mercy she had been shown. That night, Elara sat beside Mira and told one final story. It was about courage, kindness, and the power of hope. A tale that mirrored the very journey they had lived. As her words drifted into the air, Myra's eyes shone with wonder, and even the stars outside seemed to listen. When Elara finally lay back and gazed at the night sky, she no longer felt like a servant girl trapped in an attic. She felt like a true princess, not of crowns and castles, but of heart and spirit. And somewhere beyond the horizon, she believed her father was looking at the same stars, proud of the daughter who had turned sorrow into light. And with that belief warming her soul, she closed her eyes, ready to dream of all the tomorrows yet to come.